Tunity, good evening, dear traveler of the Pillow and Blanket Republic. Tonight we step into the golden last light of the Inca world, where the Andes rise like solemn old judges, stone terraces cling to cliffs with admirable stubbornness, Tunity in the empire of Tuansu stretches across western South America with the confidence of a man who has just organized his sock drawer by imperial decree. You stand high above the clouds, Tunity, which sounds poetic until your lungs begin behaving like they have been charged a luxury fee for every breath. Below you, valleys are stitched with maize, potatoes, quinoa, Tunity, and communities that know exactly how to coax a meal out of slopes that should, by all reasonable standards, be used only by goats and very ambitious furniture. The llamas chew with the bored dignity of officials who have seen empires come and go and still refuse to hurry. This is Tuantinsuyu, the four parts together, an empire reaching from what is now southern Colombia through Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Tunity, and into parts of Chile and Argentina. It has no practical wheeled transport, no horses, and no alphabetic writing, yet it moves people, food, soldiers, messages, cloth, tribute, and sacred authority across mountains, deserts, coastlands, Tunity, and forests. If that sounds impossible, do not worry. The mountains agree with you, and the Inca politely ignored them. The world around you is not only beautiful, it is organized. Roads climb where roads have no business climbing. Tunity storehouses sit like sensible old uncles above settlements, packed with dried potatoes, maize, textiles, weapons, and emergency supplies. Canals guide water. Terraces hold soil. Officials count obligations. Tunity, priests watch the sun with the steady seriousness of men who believe the heavens are a calendar, a temple, and possibly a supervisor. And yet, old friend, strength can wear the same coat as strain. From a distance, the empire looks solid, bright, Tunity, and orderly. Up close, you notice the seams. The Inca Empire is astonishingly young for its size. Under rulers such as Pachacuti and Topaninka Yupanqui, it expands with dazzling speed, swallowing valleys, kingdoms, languages, shrines, tune and rival chiefs. A state can conquer a valley before it has persuaded the people inside it to stop missing their old world. It can build a road faster than it can build loyalty. Tunity, it can put an official in charge faster than it can erase a grudge that has been simmering since grandfather's grandfather lost a field, a shrine, or a very good-looking llama. The empire is brilliant, but brilliance can cast shadows. Tunity, labor obligations keep roads maintained, storehouses filled, and armies supplied. Communities owe work through the Midas system, and in return the state promises protection, redistribution, and order. On paper, this is an elegant arrangement. Tunity, in practice, it depends very much on whether you are the gentleman issuing the order or the unfortunate soul dragging stones uphill while wondering why knees were included in the human design without a warranty. Gold glows in temples. Tunity, not merely as wealth but as sacred sunlight made visible. To the Inca, gold speaks of the sun's status, ritual, and cosmic order. To the Spaniards who will later arrive, it will speak in a much simpler accent. Tunity, take me. That difference will matter. A sacred object can become loot very quickly when the viewer has the spiritual imagination of a hungry accountant. For now, however, life continues. Children help in fields. Elders speak in Quechua. Tunity. Messengers run the roads. Nobles wear fine textiles. Workers move in rhythm. Llamas complain just enough to maintain professional standards. Nothing feels doomed to the people cooking dinner inside it. Tunity, collapse is obvious only after historians have had several centuries, a kettle of tea, and the unfair advantage of hindsight, so remember this sunset. The Inca Empire stands vast, disciplined, sacred, and feared. It is also newly stitched together, Tunity, filled with recently conquered peoples, rival factions, heavy labor demands, and systems so tightly connected that one shock can travel through the whole body. The story of its rapid collapse begins not with weakness alone, Tunity, but with a frightening kind of strength, of finely woven cloth where one well-placed cut can loosen the entire garment. Now the road takes the stage, as every proper old-fashioned tale requires a road. Tunity, preferably one that makes the hero regret owning legs. You begin walking along the Kapak on the great Inca road system, and it becomes clear that the Empire's real miracle is not gold, not palaces. Tunity, not even the ability to farm a cliff without insulting gravity. It is stone laid across a continent. This network stretches for tens of thousands of kilometers, linking the empire's four regions to Cuzco. Main highways run north and south along the coast and highlands, while branches reach into valleys, administrative centers, mines, temples, fortresses, farms, and sacred landscapes. The Inca have no horses, carts, or iron tools, and yet they build across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Somewhere, an ancient planner looked at the Andes and said, "Yes, splendid. Let us put a commute there." Under your feet, Tunity, the road changes character like a respectable actor with a large wardrobe. Sometimes it is stone paved, sometimes it is packed earth, sometimes it climbs by steps so steep your thighs begin drafting a formal complaint. In wet country, Tunity drains protect the route. In deserts, posts and low walls guide travelers through emptiness. In the mountains, retaining walls grip the slopes. Suspension bridges made from woven grass cables sway over rivers. Tunity, rebuilt regularly by communities fulfilling labor obligations. They are beautiful, useful, and an excellent reminder that bridge maintenance is not a modern invention invented to ruin traffic. You stop at a tambo, Tunity, a stateway station where official travelers can rest, eat, and change loads. Nearby storehouses hold food, clothing, and equipment. Tunity, this is not a cheerful roadside inn with a sign reading "Last potatoes for 40 kilometers. Though one suspects the customer reviews would have been lively. It is administration made physical. A road in the Inca world, Tunity, is not merely a strip of ground, it is a command line written in stone. Then a chasqui appears. He runs with the lean confidence of a person whose lungs have not filed for divorce from his body. These relay runners carry messages across the empire, Tunity, moving from station to station with astonishing speed. A message may be memorized, supported by a quipu, or accompanied by an object that gives the words meaning. In a world without alphabetic writing, the runner becomes a living letter, Tunity, and the road becomes a sentence stretching over mountains. Here lies both the genius and the danger. The road system knits the empire together. It lets armies move, orders travel, governors report, tribute flow, Tunity, and rebellion be noticed before it becomes too proud of itself. It makes Cusco feel present in valleys where the capital is only a rumor beyond peaks. The emperor's arm becomes long, muscular, Tunity, and rather inclined to tap you on the shoulder with a new assignment. But a net that holds everything together can also spread the tremor when one cord snaps. Roads that carry commands can carry panic. Bridges that move imperial troops can move invaders. Relay stations that spread information can spread rumors. A system built for control becomes dangerous when control itself begins to wobble like a table at a cheap banquet. The movement is also regulated. Ordinary people do not simply stroll along imperial highways in search of scenic content and a charming Alka selfie. The road belongs to the state. Soldiers, officials, messengers, laborers, porters, Tunity, and nobles move within rules. If you are permitted to travel, the road is a blessing. If you are drafted to repair it, supply it, or walk it under orders, it may feel less like connection and more like Cusco has developed an extremely long finger. You climb to a pass where the wind comes through the grass and the peaks stand pale and immense. Far below, another strip of road curls along a ridge and vanishes into cloud. It is magnificent. It is also absurd. The Inca do not defeat the mountains by flattening them. They negotiate with them one stair wall, bridge, and storehouse at a time. As evening gathers, the secret of the road becomes clear. The Kapakam improves Inca strength, Tunity, but it also shows the cost of that strength. The empire must be constantly maintained, fed, repaired, counted, believed in, and walked. When crisis comes, it will not remain politely in one valley, it will run. It will cross bridges, Tunity, it will climb stairs. It will arrive at the next station breathless, carrying news no one wants to hear. You descend into a valley where the wind softens and smoke rises from low houses, Tunity. Terraces curve along the slopes like green fingerprints pressed into the mountainside. Somewhere a dog barks with the proud confidence of a creature that has never paid tribute, never repaired a bridge, Tunity, and never once explained imperial logistics before breakfast. At an administrative center, you look for books. There are none, no shelves, no parchment, no alphabet marching neatly across paper. For an empire this large, Tunity, the absence feels impossible, like attending a royal banquet and discovering the soup is being served in a hat. And yet, the Inca rule. They count harvests, herds, laborers, storehouses, weapons, textiles, households, tribute, Tunity, and obligations with astonishing care. Their great instrument is the quipu, a system of knotted cords read and managed by trained specialists called kupukamayuk. In the hands of an official, a quipu hangs in colored strands, knotted at intervals, Tunity twisted and arranged with quiet purpose. To your modern eye, it resembles a friendship bracelet designed by a tax inspector with excellent secrets. The cords are not decoration. Not type, placement, color, cord position. Tunity and twist can carry information, especially numerical records. A quipu may track maize, potatoes, cloth, llamas, weapons, labor, or community obligations. The empire's memory is not written in ink. It is tied in fiber, held in trained hands, Tunity, and supported by living specialists who know how to read what others only see. That elegance is also a risk. A quipu without its reader can fall silent. The system depends not only on objects but on people, Tunity. It is rather like storing the office password in your cousin's head and hoping he remains healthy, loyal, and not captured by history. If the specialist dies, flees, is displaced, or is ignored by outsiders, the cord still exists, Tunity, but the meaning may begin to fade. Administration is layered with care. Households and kin groups owe labor. Local leaders known as Caracas mediate between their people and the Inca state. Provincial officials and nobles enforce Cusco's will. Tunity, the Inca often do not erase local leadership, they absorb it. They reward cooperation, take hostages when needed, educate elite children in Cusco, distribute fine textiles, and make obedience feel like honor, duty, fear, Tunity, and good sense, all wrapped in one very official blanket. The economy does not run on coins in the way many later worlds expect. Labor is the great currency. Communities build roads, farm state lands, serve in armies, weave cloth, carry goods, Tunity, and maintain infrastructure. In return, the state offers food and crisis protection, ceremonial feast and redistribution. If the arrangement works, it appears orderly and generous. If you are the person hauling sacks uphill, redistribution may sound suspiciously like my lower back has been nationalized. Storehouses contain chuno, freeze-dried potatoes made for endurance, along with maize, textiles, and tools. The Andes are unpredictable. Frost, drought, Tunity, flood, and altitude make survival a practical science. The Inca state responds by planning ahead. Terraces protect soil, canals manage water. Storehouses turn famine from a disaster into a problem the state can at least attempt to manage. Tunity, it is governance with a pantry, and that is often more powerful than governance with speeches. Yet every layer has a weakness. The emperor depends on nobles, nobles depend on governors. Governors depend on Caracas. Tunity Caracas depend on communities that may nod politely while remembering exactly how much they dislike being managed by distant men in fine clothes. If commands flow smoothly, Tuanslo feels like one body. If disease, civil war, fear, tunity, or invasion interrupts the channels, the body begins to lose feeling in its fingers. Later Spaniards will bring paper contracts, royal orders, religious texts, legal claims, and documents that can travel without the speaker. Inca authority. Tunity, by contrast, is deeply embodied. It lives in memory, ritual, specialists, place, spoken command, and recognition. When rulers are captured, temples stripped, nobles killed, and record keepers displaced, tunity. Knowledge does not transfer neatly into the hands of the conquerors. Much is broken, mistranslated, or dismissed by men who mistake difference for simplicity. So the quipu sways in the fading light, beautiful and quiet. Tunity. It tells you something essential. The Inca were not primitive because they lacked alphabetic writing. They were sophisticated in another way. But their sophistication was woven through relationships. Cut those relationships, remove those people, mock those rituals, seize those places, and the cords may remain while the world that knew how to obey them begins to come undone. Tunity. Now you leave the administrative center and walk into a province that has only recently learned to call itself part of Tawantinsuyu. The road is impressive, the officials are confident, and the storehouses sit in their usual sensible posture. Tunity. Yet the mood has changed. People pause before answering. Old place names survive under new imperial titles. Local shrines receive offerings quietly beyond the bright gaze of Cuzco sun ceremonies. The empire is here, yes, but older worlds are still breathing under the floorboards. The Inca are clever conquerors. They do not always smash everything and replace it with a neat imperial label. Often, conquest arrives as negotiation. Tunity, though negotiation with an army nearby has a certain unfair advantage. A community may keep its local leader if that leader cooperates. A sacred place may continue receiving respect if it does not challenge imperial order. Tunity, local customs may survive provided the sun cult, the emperor, and Cuzco's demands receive their proper bow. This matters because the empire grows with breathtaking speed in the 15th and early 16th centuries. Different ethnic groups, Tunity valleys, languages, chiefdoms, and older kingdoms are folded into one state. Some are defeated in war, others submit through diplomacy, marriage, alliances, gifts, intimidation, Tunity, or the practical conclusion that resisting a large imperial army may not be the finest use of a Tuesday afternoon. You stop by workers repairing a terrace wall. Their hands are skilled and steady. They may owe labor to the state, Tunity, but they are not blank subjects. Their grandparents may have served another lord. Their songs may name older victories and defeats. Their fields may have been reorganized. Their young men may be drafted for distant work. Too, their local elite may praise Cusco while the village quietly counts the price of obedience. Was Inca rule harsh exploitation, protective redistribution, sacred order, practical compromise, or all of the above depending on who is holding the basket? Historians still debate it, as historians do when given a topic, a chair, and enough tea. The answer likely shifts from valley to valley. If state storehouses feed you during famine, Tunity, the empire looks generous. If roads bring soldiers to crush your cousin's rebellion, the empire seems much less cuddly. Human beings are famously complicated when someone else controls the tax ledger. Resettlement deepens this complexity. Tunity, the Inca moved populations called Mitmacuna or Mitimas from one region to another. Loyal groups may be placed in rebellious areas. Skilled farmers or craftsmen may be moved where their talents serve state needs. Tunity, troublemakers may find themselves relocated so far from home that even their complaints need directions. This strengthens control, spreads imperial culture, and disrupts local resistance. It also plants resentment in new soil. Tunity, religion is equally layered. Communities honor local wakas, sacred stones, mountains, springs, ancestors, or places with personality and power. Tunity, a conquered group might participate in imperial ceremonies while still believing its own mountain watches with a cold, rocky expression that says, Tunity. I remember everything. Imagine trying to run an empire where the landscape itself is part of local politics. Suddenly your town council seems delightfully simple. The Inca also pressure elites through education, ceremony, textiles, feasts, Tunity, and honors. Fine cloth is not just clothing, it is wealth, prestige, and identity folded into fabric. The children of local rulers may be brought to Cuzco, taught imperial ways, and turned into bridges between local society and the state. Tunity, feasts make obligation feel warm, maize beer helps. Nothing says loyalty quite like a cup provided by the same authority that can also send soldiers. But the speed of expansion leaves scars. Tunity, some peoples have been conquered only a generation earlier or even less. Their obedience may be practical rather than emotional. When the Inca state is strong, they comply. When it weakens, compliance becomes a question rather than a habit. This will be crucial later, because the Spaniards do not enter a world of one united people singing one imperial anthem in perfect harmony. They enter a political mosaic filled with grudges, rivalries, and local ambitions. At dusk, Tunity, beside a cooking fire, people speak softly, a child laughs, an elder looks toward the mountain, imperial official passes, and certain conversations become as quiet as a guilty cat. Life continues. Llamas chew with admirable neutrality, refusing to take a public position on imperial policy. Here is the essential point: Tawantinsuyu is not a smooth block of power, it is a mosaic held together by roads, labor, ritual, fear, rewards, food, hostages, and persuasion. Some pieces shine, tunity, some pieces crack. Some have been pressed into place so recently that the edges are still sharp. The empire can command many peoples, but it cannot make all of them forget who they were before. And when the center trembles, the edges will remember. Opportunity, morning comes colder, and the empire no longer feels quite so still. The roads remain. The terraces still cling to the slope, storehouses still promise order, but messengers pass more quickly now, and officials speak in lower voices. Tunity, local leaders wear the world's oldest political expression, a face emptied of opinion, useful whenever powerful men are arguing and someone may later ask what side you were on. Two royal brothers are pulling the empire apart, sons of Huayna Capac. Their father had ruled a vast empire, but his death, likely connected to the wave of epidemic disease moving through the Andes, creates a succession crisis. The chosen heir also dies. Tunity. Suddenly the question of who rules is no longer ceremonial, it becomes armed, bloody, and extremely inconvenient for everyone who had hoped the imperial family might behave like adults for 5 minutes. Huascar holds Cusco, Tunity's sacred capital and old imperial heart. Atahualpa commands strong northern forces around Quito, supported by experienced generals. The empire's geography begins to matter politically. Cusco represents legitimacy, lineage, and sacred centrality. Tunity, the north, represents military strength, expansion, and hardened armies. Everyone else watches the wind and tries to determine which royal son is most likely to burn them. Tunity, succession in the Inca world is not a neat matter of the eldest son automatically stepping forward while everyone applauds and updates the stationery. Royal lineages, mothers, families, noble factions, military reputations, sacred approval, tunity, and political alliances all matter. The royal family is less a simple tree than a very expensive knot, and now several important people are yanking the cords while insisting the sun itself agrees with their interpretation. Tunity, the civil war is not a polite disagreement. Armies mobilize. Storehouses feed men who should have been available to defend the empire from outsiders. Roads carry Inca troops against Inca troops. Tunity, command networks become channels of internal violence. The imperial machine still works, but now it works against itself, which is never ideal in a state, a household, or a washing machine. You follow soldiers along a stone road. Tunity, their sandals slap the ground. They carry clubs, slings, spears, shields, and quilted armor. They are disciplined fighters, not background actors waiting for Europeans to enter the scene. But discipline under divided command becomes dangerous. Tunity, in one valley, Huascar's men demand loyalty. In another, Atahualpa's generals do the same. Local communities must choose carefully, because supporting the wrong brother is not a career path with retirement benefits. Tunity, Atahualpa's forces eventually gain the upper hand. His generals defeat Huascar's side after brutal campaigns. Cusco is threatened and taken. Huascar is captured. Atahualpa appears victorious, but victory arrives wearing a blood-stained cloak. Nobles have been killed, armies are exhausted, factions are bitter. The sacred aura of imperial unity is cracked in public view. For subject peoples, the civil war is terrifying but also revealing. The sons of the sun can fight like ordinary men. The royal family can fracture, authority can fail. If the center can bleed, perhaps older loyalties can reawaken. Perhaps a community forced into obedience can reconsider. Perhaps a local elite can bargain with the next rising power. Tunity, once subjects learn that the center is not invincible, obedience becomes less like religion and more like arithmetic. Rumors spread. Omens appear in later accounts, strange signs, warnings, heavenly disturbances. Tunity, stories polished by memory after catastrophe. Whether these details were truly seen or later shaped into dramatic hindsight, they reveal a human habit. After disaster, people look backward for signs the universe sent a memo. Unfortunately, Tunity, the universe often writes in terrible handwriting. Civil war does more than kill soldiers, it interrupts tribute, labor, confidence, and trust. It teaches provinces that the imperial order can be contested, it leaves officials uncertain. Two roads crowded with rumors and storehouses strained. The Inca state depends on authority flowing from the Sapa Inca through nobles and governors to local leaders and communities. Now that flow is muddy with fear, and then comes timing so poor that fiction would reject it as excessive. Atahualpa has barely emerged victorious when strangers arrive from the coast. He has defeated his brother but not healed the empire. He has armies but they are scattered. Tunity. He has prestige but also enemies. He has captured Huascar but not erased Huascar's supporters. He is powerful, yes, but power after civil war is like a splendid wall after an earthquake, impressive from the street, quietly cracked within. Evening returns, the roads darken. Brother has turned against brother, and the sun's family has split its own light. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the next disaster is already walking inland. Before the strangers fully enter the imperial stage, another enemy arrives first, and it is the most discourteous kind, invisible, tireless, and completely uninterested in diplomatic ceremony. No banner rises, no hoofbeats shake the road. Tunity, no armored men step out of the mist. Instead, a child develops a fever. A trader coughs, a family closes its doorway. A village that sounded ordinary yesterday falls strangely quiet by morning. Tunity, smallpox likely reaches the Andes before Pizarro's main force enters the Inca heartland. Disease introduced from the old world moves through indigenous networks faster than many Europeans themselves. Tunity, striking populations with no inherited immunity. It kills Huayna Capac and probably his chosen heir, helping set the succession crisis in motion. So when you remember Hoskar and Atahualpa pulling the empire apart, Tunity, remember that fever had already loosened the throne. You enter a household where smoke, herbs, worry, and silence fill the air. A mother presses cloth to a burning forehead. An elder murmurs prayers. Someone brings water, Tunity. Someone else stands outside, frightened to enter and ashamed to leave. This is not merely a medical event, it is a social earthquake. In a world built on households, labor groups, local leadership, ritual obligations, and seasonal work, Tunity, every missing person leaves a hole. Fields still need tending, roads still need repairing, storehouses still need filling, bridges still need rebuilding, armies still need food, runners still need stations, llamas still require supervision, tea compliments, and occasional arguments they fully intend to win. Disease weakens the human engine of empire at the very moment the empire requires every gear to turn smoothly. The Inca state is organized, but organization cannot invent immunity overnight. Storehouses can soften hunger, but they cannot replace parents, specialists, nobles, farmers, weavers, runners, or local leaders. A kipukamayuk may hold the meaning of records in memory. Even if he dies, the cords remain, but the voice attached to them may fall silent. A karaka may manage obligations if his community is grieving or suspicious, authority begins to wobble. Historians debate how decisive smallpox was by itself. Tunity, it did not conquer like an army, but it changed the conditions under which armies, rulers, and communities acted. It reduced available labor. It damaged legitimacy. It made obligations harder to fulfill. It turned confidence into dread. Tunity, disease is not a soldier, but it prepares battlefields in ways soldiers are happy to exploit. Sacred authority suffers too. The Sapa Inca is not merely a political executive with a majestic wardrobe and an impossible calendar. Tunity, he is tied to cosmic order. If he dies suddenly from a mysterious illness, and if many others die as well, people ask dangerous questions. Have the gods turned away? Did rituals fail? Are the ancestors displeased? Tunity, has the sun misplaced the empire's file? In a world where politics and sacred meaning are braided together, epidemic disease is biological, emotional, spiritual, and political all at once. Later stories sometimes describe strange illnesses, almost like a supernatural wind moving through communities before the invaders themselves were widely known. We should handle such accounts carefully, because memory dresses terror in symbols. Tunity. Still, the image is powerful. To those living through it, disease must have felt like something walking ahead of history, slipping through doorways, touching families, and leaving grief where ordinary names used to be. Tunity, you pass through another settlement. Work sounds thinner. A terrace lies partly unattended. A bridge repair waits. A relay station is short of runners. The road network, once a heartbeat, begins to stutter. The empire is not dead. It is tired. Tunity and tired empires make mistakes. Atahualpa's victory over Hoskar occurs in this world of exhaustion. He wins after disease has damaged the royal line and civil war has deepened the wound. Tunity, legitimacy is not simply a trophy picked up after battle and placed proudly on a shelf. It must be accepted, repeated, performed, and believed. Nobles, generals, priests, provincial leaders, and ordinary communities all have to recognize the ruler. Tunity, disease makes recognition harder by filling the air with fear and mourning. You sit beside a cold storehouse filled with food for crisis, and the irony is cruel. The Inca are prepared for famine, distance, labor mobilization, and many forms of war. They are not prepared for a continent-wide biological shock connected to an invasion they cannot yet see. It is like owning the finest umbrella in the kingdom and discovering the weather is a falling piano. Night settles over the highlands. Tunity, the roads, cords, conquered provinces, royal brothers, and fever all belong now to the same story. Before steel flashes, before horses thunder, before ransom gold fills a room, the empire is already breathing through illness. And in the dark, Tunity, the invisible enemy, keeps walking. You follow the road down toward Cajamarca, where the mountains open into a basin of pale grass, cold streams, and steaming baths. Atahualpa is there after the Civil War. Tunity victorious or near enough that those around him behave as if the sun has signed the paperwork. Hoskar is defeated. The northern armies are strong. Nobles gather. Messengers arrive. Soldiers watch the roads. Tunity, then come men from the west who do not fit neatly into any Andean category. They are few, which is the first absurdity. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro enters Cajamarca with fewer than 200 Spaniards, while Atahualpa has thousands of attendants and soldiers nearby. If you are a reasonable observer, you do not look at the Spaniards and say, "There goes an empire-ending force." You say, "A very lost travel party has wandered into the wrong valley." But confusion is powerful when sharpened into a plan. The Spaniards bring horses, steel, firearms, Christian claims, royal documents, ambition, greed, Tunity, and the terrifying confidence of men who know that if their gamble fails, the Andes will become their extremely scenic tomb. They have heard of the Civil War. They know Atahualpa has enemies. They understand from earlier conquest in Mexico, Tunity, that capturing a sacred ruler can break open a state without first defeating every army. Atahualpa may underestimate them because they are so few. Or perhaps he understands they are dangerous but believes he can control them. Tunity. Perhaps he permits the meeting because from his position, a victorious emperor surrounded by massive forces has little reason to fear a small band of strangers. Historians still debate his reasoning. Tunity, and Cajamarca refuses to simplify itself for our convenience. The town becomes a stage. A broad plaza sits between buildings and walls. The Spanish enter first and hide soldiers in the surrounding structures. Horsemen wait out of sight. Tunity, weapons are prepared. The plan is so risky that it belongs equally to genius and madness, which is how many historical successes look after they work and many disasters look just before they do not. You stand in the tension of late afternoon. Tunity, dust hangs low, a horse shifts in hiding, snorting softly. Somewhere a Spanish soldier whispers something that may be a prayer, a curse, or a very sincere complaint about career choices. If Atahualpa's army floods the plaza in battle order, Tunity, the Spaniards could be overwhelmed. Their advantage lies in surprise shock and the hope that Andean expectations of royal encounter will not match Spanish habits of violent ambush. Atahualpa arrives in ceremonial style, Tunity carried on a litter and surrounded by attendants. Later accounts describe men sweeping the road before him, an image so dramatic it almost asks for trumpets. Whether every detail is exact or polished by Spanish chroniclers, the meaning is clear. Tunity, the Sapa Inca, enters as a sacred ruler. He does not need to rush. He does not need to shout. His presence orders space. Here two worlds misread each other. To the Inca, Atahualpa's display communicates supreme status. To the Spaniards, Tunity, it reveals an opportunity. The ruler is visible, central, and within reach. Both sides interpret the scene through their own rules. Both sides are partly wrong, and the bill will arrive immediately. Tunity, Fray Vicente de Valverde steps forward with religious and political demands filtered through translation and cultural confusion. He presents Christian authority and Spanish royal claims in a form meaningful to Europeans, but not necessarily to an Andean emperor in his own world. A book, likely a breviary or Bible, is offered as sacred proof. One famous account says Atahualpa examines it, perhaps holds it to his ear and drops or throws it when it does not speak. The detail may serve Spanish justification, but symbolically it is perfect, a silent book meeting a world of sacred speech, memory knots, ritual, and living authority. Then the signal is given. Hidden men surge out, horses burst into the plaza, metal flashes. Guns crack, trumpets, bells, shouting, hooves, smoke, and terror collapse into one dreadful sound. Many of Atahualpa's attendants are unarmed for ceremony. The crowd breaks into confusion. The emperor remains the center of the storm, carried above panic as the world below him fractures. This single moment does not explain the entire collapse, Tunity, but it becomes a door. Behind it erodes disease, civil war, political rivalry, sacred authority, technology, greed, and misunderstanding. The door opens in Cajamarca, and history walks through wearing armor after the ambush. Cajamarca grows quiet in the way a room grows quiet after a chandelier falls. Dust hangs in the plaza, horses breathe hard. Spanish soldiers stare with the nervous amazement of men who have survived their own dreadful idea. At the center of it all is Atahualpa, no longer distant on his litter, no longer untouchable in ceremony. The son of the sun has been seized. That difference matters more than any pile of bodies. The Spaniards have not defeated every army, Tunity. They have not occupied every valley. They have not marched through every storehouse or crossed every bridge. They hold the living symbol through whom imperial command is meant to flow. It is like grabbing the steering wheel of a moving cart, Tunity, except the cart is an empire. The road runs along a cliff, and several people are still arguing over whether carts exist. Atahualpa's world shrinks to walls, guards, negotiation, and watchful gestures. Outside, Tunity, the empire stretches across mountains and deserts. Inside, the ruler becomes both prisoner and political instrument. The Spanish treat him with a mixture of respect and control because they understand his authority remains useful. Messengers can still approach, orders can still be issued in his name. A captive emperor is an awkward thing, dangerous alive, valuable alive, and terrifying to men who fear the armies still beyond the horizon. Atahualpa studies the Spaniards. Tunity, he sees their greed, rivalry, hunger for metal, and baffling excitement around gold and silver. To the Inca, gold is sacred, linked to sunlight and status. To the Spaniards is wealth, salary, proof, reward, temptation, Tunity, and possibly the nearest thing to a hymn they all know by heart. Atahualpa grasps that precious metal has power over these men, and he offers ransom. According to famous accounts, he promises to fill a room with gold and twice with silver in exchange for his freedom. The offer spreads through the Spanish camp like the smell of bread through a starving household. Suddenly everyone becomes very attentive, very devout, Tunity, and very committed to measurements. Gold begins to arrive from across the empire. Temples, palaces, and sacred spaces are stripped. Cups, plaques, vessels, ornaments, and ceremonial objects come by road. Tunity, carried by people and animals through the same network that once served imperial command. The Inca road system now gathers treasure for the captors of the Inca ruler. It is a bitter twist. Tunity infrastructure built to bind Tawantinsuyu helps finance the men prying it open. Many objects are melted down. Their forms vanish into weight. To Spanish eyes, sacred art becomes portable wealth. To Inca eyes, sunlight, devotion, memory, and cosmic order are broken into metal shares. The Spaniards behave like men cleaning out a cathedral and shouting, "Excellent, this will fit nicely in a ledger." One laughs only because the alternative is to stare too long at the loss. Tunity. A famous story says that Atahualpa marks a line on the wall to show how high the gold should reach. Whether every detail is exact or sharpened by chroniclers, the image endures because it is unforgettable, a captive emperor raising his hand, Tunity, turning a room into a promise measured in treasure. Did Atahualpa believe the Spaniards would release him? Did he intend to buy time for his generals and nobles? Tunity, did he underestimate how quickly fear and greed can become policy when trapped inside metal helmets? Historians debate the question. He was no fool. He had just survived a civil war and understood power. But he faced men operating by rules in which promises could be bent, sanctified, and broken with alarming speed. Meanwhile, command outside distorts. Some nobles remain loyal to Atahualpa. Others remember Huascar. Tunity, subject peoples watch for advantage. Spanish fear grows, and fear makes them more dangerous. They worry an Inca army will come to crush them. They worry Atahualpa is plotting. Tunity, they worry their own small force sits inside a vast land like a fly on a drum. A frightened captor with gold and a prisoner is not a creature of moderation. Atahualpa is accused of rebellion, idolatry, plotting, and other charges that reveal less about justice than about Spanish anxiety. The ransom has been paid, or near enough that its promise is unmistakable, yet he is not freed. In 1533, Atahualpa is executed. The empire shudders. This is political decapitation. The sacred ruler is killed not through ordinary succession ceremony or royal death, but by outsiders after captivity and ransom. The Spanish quickly try to use puppet rulers. Tunity, but legitimacy is not a cloak one can toss over a nervous young noble and declare war. Cuzco still matters. Lineages still matter. Local acceptance still matters. Now everything is tangled. Night falls over Cajamarca. The gold is counted. Tunity, the room that promised freedom, becomes proof of betrayal. The emperor is dead, and the empire's center is no longer merely cracked. It is open. Now we turn to the famous objects in every simplified telling: horses, steel, gunpowder. Tunity, they are important, but let us not allow them to march across the story alone like actors who have mistaken themselves for the entire play. Technology mattered enormously, especially in moments of shock, but it did not topple an empire by itself. Tunity, a sword cannot govern a province, a horse cannot collect tribute, a musket cannot explain local politics, though it can certainly interrupt a meeting. Still, imagine the first terror of a horse. In the Andes, no such animal exists. Tunity, a charging horseman brings height, speed, noise, smell, muscle, and violence into one moving shape. The horse snorts, hooves strike stone, the rider's sword flashes from above. Tunity, and the whole arrangement looks less like transport than a thunderstorm that has learned to hate you personally. Your brain does not calmly file it under large animal. It files it under absolutely not. Tunity, thank you. Spanish horses are precious, expensive, vulnerable, and difficult to replace. The Spaniards know this well. To Indian observers at first contact, however, horse and rider are a new battlefield problem with no familiar category. Tunity later stories suggest some indigenous people initially believed horse and rider were one creature. That may be exaggerated or shaped by conquest storytelling, but the shock was real enough. If you have never seen a cavalry charge, you are allowed a moment of confusion. Frankly, you are allowed several. Steel also matters. Spanish swords cut differently from Andean weapons of wood, stone, bronze, and fiber. Metal armor protects against many blows. Tunity. Helmets reduce the effect of strikes that might otherwise end a conversation permanently. Chain mail and breastplates help a small number of soldiers survive moments when lightly protected fighters might fall. The Spaniards are not invincible. Tunity. Despite their best efforts to advertise otherwise, they can be hungry, tired, wounded, frightened, lost, and deeply bothered by altitude. But their equipment lets them endure certain encounters longer than their numbers alone should allow. Tunity, gunpowder adds smoke, flame, noise, and confusion. Early firearms are slow, awkward, and unreliable compared with later weapons. Nobody is calmly using a modern rifle while sipping dreadful ship coffee. An arquebus can misfire. Tunity, it can be slow to reload. Rain is not its friend, but in a crowded plaza or sudden ambush, the crack of gunfire echoes like thunder made by human hands. Its psychological effect may exceed its practical efficiency. Tunity, especially the first time people hear it. Small cannons, firearms, armor, and horses together create moments of shock. They can break rhythm, scatter attendants, panic crowds, and make a tiny force appear larger than it is. At Cajamarca, Tunity, that shock helps the Spaniards seize Atahualpa. And once the emperor is seized, the political consequences become far greater than the immediate military effect. Dogs also enter the story in grim fashion. Tunity. Spanish war dogs had been used in parts of the conquest of the Americas, trained to intimidate and attack. We do not need to dwell on the worst details to understand the effect. A large aggressive dog in a battle line is another unfamiliar terror. Tunity in history already had quite enough anxiety before someone added armored cannons to the menu. But Andean fighters adapt. They are not foolish. Once the first shock passes, they target horses, use terrain, avoid open ground, build defenses, Tunity, and exploit the mountains. Slingers can throw stones with terrifying force enough to injure armored men or horses. Warriors use numbers, ambushes, narrow passes, and local knowledge. The Spanish fear them repeatedly, and that fear tells us a great deal. If technology were a magic victory button, the Spaniards would not spend so much time acting like men trying to sleep in a room full of knives. The Andes also resist European advantages. Tunity, horses struggle on steep paths, narrow bridges, broken terrain, and high passes. Armor becomes heavy in thin air. Firearms dislike weather. Supply lines become nightmares. Tunity. The same Inca roads that help movement can lead invaders into places where cavalry loses freedom and local fighters know every ridge and ravine. So why did these technologies matter so much? Because they arrived at the worst possible moment for the Inca state. Horses and steel did not defeat Tawantinsuyo in a clean duel. They struck a world already weakened by epidemic disease, civil war, a captured emperor, divided loyalties, Tunity, and subject peoples reconsidering obedience. Technology opened the door. Political collapse walked through wearing stolen sandals and pretending this had been the plan all along. By the fire, a dented Spanish breastplate lies near an Andean sling. Tunity, neither object tells the whole story. The Inca Empire did not fall because the Spaniards were gods or because European tools were destiny. It fell because very human advantages arrived inside a very human disaster. Tunity and the sound of hooves echoed through cracks already there. Now the procession widens in history, that old rascal becomes more complicated. It is tempting to imagine a tiny band of Spaniards facing the whole Inca Empire alone. Tunity, like a dramatic painting in which several bearded men pose heroically while everyone else waits for the caption. But the real story contains many more faces: indigenous allies, guides, interpreters, porters, warriors, local leaders, tunity, and communities whose relationship with the Inca state was anything but simple. Spanish conquest in the end has depended heavily on indigenous support. This was not merely Spain versus the Inca. Tunity, two tidy teams wearing matching uniforms and agreeing on rules before kickoff. Tuantansu was a mosaic of conquered groups, relocated populations, rival elites, resentful subjects, loyal communities, and political factions. Tunity, once the center weakened, many pieces began to shift. Think back to the recently conquered provinces. People there may have obeyed Cusco, but obedience is not the same as affection. If your community had been taxed, drafted, resettled, humiliated, tunity, or forced to support a royal faction it disliked, Atahualpa's fall might not feel like the end of the world. It might feel like an opening. That does not make the Spaniards liberators in any simple moral sense. Tunity, it makes them a new and dangerous tool in an old political field. Groups such as the Kaidari, who had suffered under Inca power or opposed Atahualpa's side, played important roles. Some provided supplies, information, and manpower. Others watched, waited, and chose cautiously. Local Caracas might cooperate to protect their status. Communities might hope Spanish power would weaken Cusco's demands. Tunity, former enemies of Atahualpa, might see a chance to settle accounts from the Civil War. It is not clean hero versus villain. It is politics, which means everyone is smiling while quietly counting knives. Tunity, did indigenous allies understand the long-term consequences of helping the Spaniards? Of course not in full. No one sees the whole future while standing in the smoke of the present. We know colonial rule will bring tribute demands, tunity, forced conversion, labor exploitation, violence, and continuing disease. Many people at the time knew instead their own local past: Inca armies, labor obligations, political humiliation, disrupted communities, and recent civil war. They made decisions within crisis, not inside a textbook chapter with the ending helpfully printed in bold. The Spaniards absolutely needed that help. They needed roads, food carriers, translators, intelligence, local alliances, tunity, and knowledge of rivalries. They needed to know which valleys were hostile, which leaders could be bribed, which storehouses held supplies, which crossings were safe, tunity, and which mountain paths were likely to turn an armed column into a very expensive line of regret. European conquest came with a shocking amount of luggage, armor, weapons, food, loot, religious objects, documents, and ambition. Tunity and ambition is notoriously heavy. You walk beside porters carrying loads up a cold road. Their faces reveal little. They may fear the Spaniards. They may dislike the Inca more. They may simply follow orders from local leaders who have chosen alliance for reasons that never reach the people with aching backs. Tunity, great historical decisions are often announced by elites and then transported uphill by someone whose knees were not consulted. Spanish chroniclers sometimes downplayed indigenous support, tunity, because conquest stories sound grander when fewer allies appear in the footnotes. Later memory and scholarship restore the messier picture. The Spanish were often guided, fed, supplied, and reinforced by Andean people with their own agendas. Tunity, the conquest was not a one-man sword commercial. It was a coalition, unstable and self-interested, and coalitions are where history keeps its sharpest elbows. Alliances also damaged Inca authority psychologically. Tunity, when subject peoples joined the invaders, others saw that universal obedience was breaking. Every guide who led Spaniards along an imperial road turned Inca infrastructure against its builders. Every community that provided food reduced Spanish vulnerability. Every local defection made Cusco look less inevitable. The Spanish learned quickly to exploit division. They supported one royal claimant against another. Tunity, they presented themselves as punishers, allies, arbiters, and masters depending on the hour. After Atahualpa's death, puppet rulers gave him a borrowed cloak of legitimacy. If one faction hated another, the Spanish could promise revenge. If elites wanted recognition, the Spanish could promise titles. Whether promises survive contact with Spanish greed is another matter, and one should always read the fine print before signing anything near a conquistador. Yet indigenous allies were not merely dupes. Many acted strategically, some gained temporary advantage, some preserved local power, some later resisted Spanish rule when colonial demands became unbearable. Tunity, human choices do not freeze into one meaning forever. As evening thickens, the line along the road is mixed: Spaniards, horses, Andean allies, porters, interpreters, scouts, and local leaders, all bound together by fear, opportunity, resentment, and calculation. The empire is not falling to a tiny foreign blade alone. It is being pried open by many hands, foreign and local, each gripping a different edge of the fracture. The road now pulls everyone toward Cusco, Tunity, the sacred knot of the Inca world. Cusco is not merely a capital in the ordinary sense, a place where officials lose documents and important men develop opinions in large rooms. It is the imperial heart. Roads radiate from it. Tunity, noble lineages root themselves in it. Temples, palaces, mummies, rituals, and memories gather there like stars around a dark center. Atahualpa is dead. His absence hangs over the journey like cold mist. The empire still has armies, nobles, priests, communities, and storehouses, but the sacred center of command has been damaged. A ruler can be replaced in name, yes, A puppet can be dressed in fine cloth. A ceremony can be arranged. But legitimacy is not soup. You cannot simply reheat it and hope nobody notices the flavor has changed. In 1533, the Spanish enter Cusco. The moment gives them immense symbolic and political power. To take Cusco is not merely to occupy a city. Tunity, it is to touch the empire's heart and claim that the heartbeat now answers to someone else. You enter with the crowd. The city is tense, not empty. People watch from doorways. Nobles calculate. Indigenous allies expect rewards. Tunity Spanish soldiers stare at the stonework with the startled respect of men whose greed has encountered craftsmanship so excellent it must pause to admire the masonry. The walls are fitted without mortar. Tunity stones cut and join so tightly that even a blade struggles to slip between them. Some blocks look as if they have politely agreed to become one another. At the sacred center stands Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. Among the holiest places in the Inca world, its golden decoration shines in memory as a language of sacred power tied to Inti. The Spanish, being consistent characters, see wealth. Gold and silver objects are seized, divided, melted. Tunity and carried away, sacred forms become bullion. Religious space becomes colonial opportunity. Imagine someone entering your most sacred building and asking with terrible cheerfulness, "But what is the resale value?" Stories of Cusco sacred gardens describe golden plants, animals, and figures gleaming in ritual spaces. Whether every detail is exact or magnified in memory, Tunity, the image reveals an Inca vision of cosmic order made visible. Gold was not merely money waiting for Spaniards to discover it. It was sunlight shaped by human hands. When the Spanish stripped it away, they were not only stealing treasure. Tunity, they were dismantling a visual grammar of power. Was Cusco's capture the true collapse of the empire, or only one stage in a longer struggle? The answer is both more complicated and more interesting. Politically, Tunity, the Spanish gain a tremendous advantage. Symbolically, the wound is enormous, but the Andes do not go silent because foreigners occupy, capital armies remain. Nobles maneuver. Local communities choose, hesitate, betray, comply, and resist. Tunity, the Spanish try to govern through Inca forms when useful. They elevate puppet rulers to give their occupation a native face. Tupac Hulpa, one Spanish-backed ruler, dies soon after being raised up, deepening uncertainty. Tunith and Manco Inca becomes important as the Spaniards search for legitimacy they cannot manufacture alone. They need Inca authority even while destroying it. They need the cloak, but keep cutting holes in it. Tunity, this is a bold strategy if one's goal is long-term confusion. Cusco becomes a scene of redistribution in the ugliest sense. Palaces are claimed, treasures divided, sacred buildings repurposed. Spanish factions quarrel over shares, rank, tunity, and control. Nothing says unified conquest like destabilizing a continent and then arguing about who gets the better house. You walk along a street where Inca stone walls hold up a world being renamed. Crosses and banners begin to appear. Tunity. Spanish priests bring Christian claims. Officials bring legal language that attempts to turn seizure into order. Yet older meanings do not vanish. People remember which palace belonged to which ruler. They remember which waka mattered. Tunity. They remember where offerings were made, where royal mummies were honored, where processions once moved. Cusco's capture is practical and theatrical. Practically, it gives the Spanish wealth, hostages, elite networks, and administrative leverage. Tunity. Roads that once carried commands from Cusco can now extend Spanish influence. Theatrically, it tells subject peoples the old order has been penetrated at its core. Night settles over stone walls that have seen triumph, ceremony, civil war, tunity, and now foreign occupation. Cusco has fallen into Spanish hands, but not into silence. Beneath the new claims, memory is awake, and memory is a stubborn tenant. Cusco remains occupied, but it does not become calm. If anything, it feels compressed. Tunity, like a storm cloud held too low over the roofs. Manco Inca, raised with Spanish support, begins as a convenient ruler for the invaders. They need him. His royal blood provides legitimacy. And legitimacy is a valuable thing when one has very little of it and a great deal of stolen property. At first, Manco cooperates, or appears to, but cooperation under humiliation has a short shelf life. Spanish mistreatment, greed, tunity, factional quarrels, and contempt push him toward rebellion. He comes to understand that being a puppet ruler is rather like being invited to sit on a throne while someone else keeps the arms, legs, room guards, and lunch. In 1536, Tunity Manco Inca leads a massive rebellion against the Spanish. He escapes supervision, gathers forces, and lays siege to Cuzco. The moment proves something essential: the Inca world is wounded but not helpless. Political collapse is not the same as total surrender. The old imperial heart still has defenders. You feel the city shudder as warriors gather from valleys and highlands. Slingers, spearmen, commanders, nobles, and communities mobilize. Manco's forces surround Cuzco and attack Spanish-held positions. Fires rise, smoke rolls through streets. The fortress of Sexayaman, towering above the city with enormous stone walls, becomes central to the struggle. Those stones look as if giants had entered the masonry business and taken it personally. The siege is terrifying for the Spanish. They are not lounging around polishing helmets and congratulating themselves. They are trapped, outnumbered, tunity, and afraid. Andean slingers are deadly. They do not throw pebbles for recreation like bored children near a pond. A sling stone in trained hands can smash armor, injure horses, and turn confidence into a brief noise followed by regret. Fire. Stones, pressure, hunger, and fear close in. Could Manco have reversed the conquest? Historians debate the question. He came dangerously close to changing the course of events. The Spanish survived through cavalry charges where terrain allowed, tunity, desperate fighting, indigenous allies, internal Inca difficulties. and sheer stubborn luck of the kind that makes later chroniclers sound more heroic than they probably felt. The fighting at Sacsayhuaman becomes especially important. Spanish forces push to retake the fortress because whoever controls it threatens the city below. The struggle is brutal. The stones, so beautiful in peace, become a stage for fire and blood. Inca warriors fight with discipline and courage. Spanish cavalry steal and allies help break key positions. The battle shows again that technology matters, but never alone. It matters in terrain, timing, morale, leadership, and alliances. Manco faces structural difficulties too. Coordinating huge forces across mountains is hard, even for a state built around movement. Armies need food. Farmers cannot remain away from fields forever. Local loyalties vary. Some communities hesitate. Some allies of the Spanish stay loyal for their own reasons. The same complexity that helped weaken the empire now complicates its attempt at restoration. The Spanish exploit every opening. Their cavalry can still shock in suitable spaces. Their alliances supply bodies and knowledge. Their factions quarrel, but danger can briefly teach quarrelsome men to stand together, which is one of history's more annoying habits. The siege continues, fierce and costly. But Cusco does not fall back to Manco. At twilight, smoke darkens the stones. The city survives the siege, but not peacefully. The rebellion has revealed both the remaining strength of Inca resistance and the terrible damage already done. Manco can still gather an army, he can still inspire loyalty, he can still make Spanish survival uncertain. Yet he cannot fully reweave the empire from the torn cloth he inherited. The heart has not been reclaimed. So Manco turns away from Cusco and toward the harder, wetter, more hidden world of the eastern slopes. The struggle will not end, it will change terrain. The empire that once ruled from a golden center will now survive as resistance in mist, forest, and mountain shadow. You follow Manco away from Cusco and the empire changes shape. The clean lines of roads and terraces give way to narrower trails, wet leaves, cloud forest, hidden valleys, and the thick green patience of places that do not care for tidy maps. This is not the old imperial stage of golden temples and grand processions. It is a refuge, a resistance world. A state in exile carrying memory like a flame cupped against rain. This refuge becomes Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of the Neo-Inca state. After the failed siege of Cusco, Manco Inca retreats into this remote region and continues resistance. Spanish power grows elsewhere, but Vilcabamba remains difficult to reach and harder to control. Geography becomes shield, cloak, and inconvenience. The jungle does not defeat armies politely, it soaks them, confuses them, feeds insects. Hides trails and turns confidence into mildew. You move along a narrow path where leaves brush your shoulders and the air smells of wet earth, bark, and hidden water. The old empire of open roads and central storehouses has not disappeared, but its surviving political life has shifted. Here power is smaller, more defensive, and more intimate. A messenger matters, a trail matters, a loyal household matters. The difference between safety and disaster may be a guide who remembers where the river can be crossed without turning everyone into a cautionary tale. Manco builds a court in exile. He preserves ceremony, claims authority, commands loyalty, and acts as ruler. Messengers move in and out. Alliances are made. Raids and resistance continue. The Spanish cannot simply declare the Inca gone and expect the mountains to applaud. Vilcabamba is a reminder that conquest is often announced before it is complete. Was Vilcabamba a true continuation of the Inca state, a resistance kingdom, a symbolic refuge, or a practical mountain stronghold? It was in many ways all of these. It did not command Tawantinsuyu at its old scale, but it carried royal legitimacy, memory, and opposition. A throne in exile is still a throne if enough people believe the person sitting near it matters. Even if the roof leaks and the mosquitoes are unionized. Life in Vilcabamba is not made of legend alone. People farm, repair shelters, carry food, guard paths, raise children, remember Cusco, and adjust to hardship. Resistance is not constant heroic shouting. Much of it is cooking, waiting, hiding, planting, sending messages, burying the dead, and waking up again when rain has found yet another way through the roof. Later imagination often turns Vilcabamba into a lost city wrapped in mist and treasure. The real place is fascinating enough without being forced to wear a costume. It is remote, political, practical, sacred, and dangerous. It preserves a fragment of Inca sovereignty while the colonial world expands around it. Manco's fate shows the fragility of exile. He is eventually killed by Spaniards who had taken refuge with him after internal Spanish conflicts. He gives shelter, and betrayal answers. If history were a dinner guest, this would be the point at which one would quietly remove the good silver from the table. After Manco, the Neo-Inca state continues under his successors. Spanish pressure remains. Diplomacy, conflict, conversion efforts, negotiation, and military campaigns all play their parts. Vilcabamba endures for decades after Cajamarca and Cuzco, proving that the collapse of the empire's central structure did not mean the immediate disappearance of Inca political life. Elsewhere, Spanish colonial power tightens, towns are founded. Tribute systems change but do not vanish. Labor demands continue under new names and authorities. Churches rise, officials write documents, local communities adapt, suffer, negotiate, resist, and survive. The Inca world is transformed, not erased in a single breath. Yet Vilcabamba survives because collapse is not disappearance. The sacred center is shattered, but memory moves. Royal authority is damaged, but not forgotten. The empire's old body no longer stands whole, but pieces of it still speak, fight, farm, pray, and remember. Night presses close around the refuge. Mist hides the trails, you cannot see far. And that feels appropriate. The future narrows, but it does not end. Somewhere beyond the trees, Cusco remains occupied. Somewhere in the forest, Tunity Inca resistance continues breathing. Now, dear listener, we climb one last ridge and look back across the whole astonishing story. From here, Tawantinsuyu still seems almost impossible. Roads over mountains, terraces on cliffs, Tunity storehouses above villages, runners crossing distances, Quipu cords holding memory, and Cusco shining as sacred center. The question remains, why did something so vast collapse so quickly? The answer is not one thing. Tunity, history rarely behaves so neatly. It is not simply horses, though horses certainly made a dramatic entrance. It is not simply gold, though gold attracted greed with the punctuality of flies at a picnic. It is not simply Spanish genius, a phrase that deserves careful handling and perhaps a raised eyebrow. The Inca Empire collapsed quickly because too many disasters arrived together, each worsening the next. First came disease. Tunity, smallpox, and other epidemic illnesses struck populations with no inherited immunity. They likely killed Huayna Capac and his chosen heir, shaking succession at the top. Disease weakened households, labor systems, local leadership, Tunity religious confidence, and the human networks that made the empire function. It turned a strong body feverish before the invaders fully appeared. Then came civil war. Tunu, Scar, and Atahualpa split the empire after the royal succession became unstable. Armies that might have defended the state fought each other. Nobles died. Loyalties hardened. Provinces watched the sacred family tear itself apart. Atahualpa emerged victorious but inherited a wounded empire, not a healed one. He held power at the very moment power needed repairs. Overexpansion lay beneath it all. The Inca Empire had grown with stunning speed. Rapid conquest created roads, storehouses, and administrative centers, but it also created recently conquered subjects, old resentments, rival local elites, and communities whose loyalty depended heavily on imperial strength. When the center weakened, many edges remembered they had once belonged to themselves. The Spanish then arrived with timing so precise it feels almost unfair. They entered after disease, during the aftermath of civil war, and before Atahualpa had consolidated peace. Tunity, they were few, but they carried horses, steel, firearms, and experience in conquest. More importantly, they understood the power of capturing a ruler. At Cajamarca, shock and ambush allowed them to seize Atahualpa. Tunity, and that capture did more damage than any single battle could have done. Political decapitation followed. Atahualpa's captivity confused command. His ransom drew treasure through imperial networks. Tunity, his execution wounded sacred authority and left the Spanish scrambling to use puppet rulers while destroying the very legitimacy they needed. The empire's chain of command did not simply break, it frayed in several places at once. Tunity indigenous alliances made the Spanish far more dangerous. Subject peoples, former enemies, local leaders, and rival factions supplied food, information carriers, warriors, and legitimacy. Many acted rationally within their own crisis, Tunity using Spaniards against Inca power or against Atahualpa's faction. The Spanish conquest was not a small European miracle. It was a messy coalition inside Andean politics. Cusco's capture gave the Spanish symbolic power. Tunity, the Sacred Heart, was occupied, temples were stripped, palaces claimed, roads and administrative networks could now serve new masters. Yet the capture of Cusco was not the end of resistance. Tunity Manco Inca's rebellion and the siege of Cusco in 1536 showed that the Incas still possessed military strength, political will, and deep loyalty. Vilcabamba showed that the story continued in exile. Tunity, so the collapse was quick at the top but slower beneath the surface. The imperial center fell rapidly, ruler captured, capital occupied, treasure seized, legitimacy disrupted. But Inca identity, memory, resistance, language, agriculture, stonework, Tunity, and sacred geography did not vanish. Empires collapse in documents faster than they collapse in kitchens, field songs, and family memory. Picture the empire as a finely woven cloth. Disease weakens the fibers, civil war pulls the threads. Tunity, overexpansion leaves some knots loose. Spanish shock cuts the center, indigenous rivalries tug from the edges. The cloth does not evaporate, it tears, folds, and is remade under force. That is why the mighty Inca Empire collapsed so quickly. Tunity, not because it was weak in a simple sense, but because its strengths made certain shocks travel fast. Roads carried commands, but also crisis. Centralized authority unified the empire, but made the capture of the ruler catastrophic. Tunity administration bound communities together, but depended on living specialists and local cooperation. Rapid expansion created scale, but not always loyalty. The fall was not destiny, change one factor. Huayna Capac lives longer. Tunity, the civil war never happens. Atahualpa avoids capture. More subject peoples remain loyal, disease arrives later, and the story might have unfolded differently. History does not hand out guarantees, it hands out conditions. Tunity and people make choices inside them, often with poor lighting and worse information. From the ridge, the truth is sadder and more complex than a simple tale of conquest. Tawantinsuyu fell quickly because disaster arrived as a crowd. Tunity, not a single visitor, and like all crowds it blocked the exits. After the fall, the world does not go silent. That is the first thing worth remembering. Empires collapse in maps, chronicles, treaties, and dramatic classroom timelines. Tunity, but people keep waking up. They plant crops, mend roofs, tell stories, bargain with officials, hide old meanings under new words, teach children where the path is safe and which names should be spoken softly. Tunity, you walk along an old Inca road in the years after conquest, and the stones remain patient beneath your feet. They have carried messengers, armies, priests, porters, invaders, rebels, officials, Tunity, and ordinary people trying to get through the day without being drafted into someone else's grand design. The Spanish may claim authority, but the road still remembers older footsteps. Farmers continue to plant potatoes, maize, quinoa, tunity, and other crops suited to different altitudes. Terraces still hold soil, canals still guide water, villages adapt to new pressures while preserving old skills. Andean life is transformed under colonial rule, often violently, but it is not erased. The mountains keep more than ruins, they keep habits, knowledge, language, and stubbornness. Quechua, spread widely under Inca rule, continues to be spoken by millions across the Andes. That survival matters. Language is not merely vocabulary. Tunity, it is memory with a mouth. It carries jokes, prayers, commands, lullabies, insults, field knowledge, family stories, and ways of seeing the world that cannot be melted into silver or packed onto a ship. Spanish colonial rule tries to reorder Andean life. Churches rise over sacred spaces. Tribute systems change but do not disappear. Labor demands continue under new forms. Officials write documents. Priests preach. Colonial towns appear. Tunity, yet memory pushes back. Andean communities adapt outwardly while preserving inward meanings. Old sacred places remain important, sometimes openly, sometimes quietly. Tunity, sometimes disguised beneath new religious forms like a clever guest at a very suspicious party. Inca royal descendants remain socially and politically meaningful. The memory of Tawantinsuyo becomes a resource, a wound, a symbol. Centuries later, in 1780, Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui takes the name Tupac Amarutu and leads a major rebellion against Spanish colonial rule. The name reaches backward to the last Inca ruler executed by the Spanish. Tunity, turning memory into a weapon sharp enough to trouble an empire long after the conquest seems settled. Popular imagination later fills the Andes with lost cities, hidden gold, secret roads, and mist-wrapped ruins. Tunity, some stories wander far from evidence, as stories often do when treasure is nearby and common sense has gone to bed. But the fascination itself reveals something true. The Inca world left an enormous imprint. Its stonework, roads, terraces, tunity, language, and political memory refuse to vanish. You pause beside a terrace wall and place your hand against the stone. It is cool, fitted with care, and older than the men who claimed victory over it. The wall does not boast. It does not explain itself, it simply remains, which is an underrated form of historical argument. So what endures? Not the empire as it stood at sunset in its glory. Not the old command from Cusco across 4 regions. Not the temples untouched, Tunity the royal line unbroken, the storehouses serving only Inca officials. Those things change many by force. But endurance not the same as preservation in glass. Endurance is the survival of language, technique, foodways, sacred memory, community, resistance, and identity after the official world has been broken. That is the final answer resting under the story. The Inca Empire collapsed quickly because disease, civil war, political capture, technology, alliances, overexpansion, tunity, and timing arrived together like the worst committee ever assembled. But the Inca world did not simply disappear. It transformed, resisted, hid, adapted, and kept speaking through people in stone. Now the pace slows, the ridge darkens. Tunity, the stone road, fades beneath a violet sky. Terraces soften into shadow, one level after another, like steps leading down into sleep. The mountains hold their long memory without hurry. Cusco's stones, Cajamarca's plaza, Vilcabamba's mist, tunity, and the old roads do not ask you to solve the whole past tonight. You breathe slowly. In, out. The empire rises in memory, bright for a moment beneath the sun, then settles into the folds of the Andes. What was broken is acknowledged. What endured is honored. What remains uncertain is allowed to remain uncertain, because history, like a sleepy llama, refuses to be rushed just because we brought a notebook. The wind moves lightly over the high grass. The last light leaves the peaks. Somewhere in that great sleeping landscape, footsteps on stone become softer and softer and softer still.